Welcome to an online tour of the Found in Translation exhibition, which was intended to be a physical show as part of Trans Vegas in Manchester in June 2020. But as everything this year has shifted very much to become an online extravaganza, which changed very much the scope and shape of what we were doing.
Yeah, I think that the challenges of lockdown were really interesting in how they've shaped this show, and particularly in communicating with the artists. There's been incredible generosity and exchange with them, which has been fantastic. And seeing this online show as a precursor to a physical show for next year is really, really exciting. And actually, I've heard from a couple of other artists originally invited that they are going to be coming in for that as well. So there'll be extra parts within that physical show that will be coming up in the summer next year. Yeah.
And there were a few different sort of templates out there basically for how to do an online exhibition, but we really wanted each artist in this to have their own separate space, to have their own sort of area in focus, if you like. So this is Sade Mika's page, and every artist was posed with the same five questions.
Yeah, and I thought, particularly for myself being an artist and an artist curator in this sense, that it was really important for me for the artists to have their own voices as part of this, and this was really becoming more of an exhibition catalogue really online, and that's what it allows for more accessibility from the audience to come in and dive into the work and what the artists are saying themselves as well. So I think that's been a really exciting part of the show.
Yeah, Sade's sort of mentioned Instagram there because this kind of front page does have that sort of accessibility about it, I suppose, with the format.
Yeah. Okay, so focusing on the other two artists that we're going to have with us today. So we've got Evan Schwartz and Izzy Kroese, and I think it's really interesting with both of these artists how accessible the work is and how personal it is. But I think for me that obviously there's ambiguities within both the artists' work, but there's also quite a universal way in which it's presented. I mean, Evan's work, it was interesting that EJ really picked this out as well when Trans Vegas opened, and the body positive nature of the images, but also the relatability of the images for people within different contexts and backgrounds is great, and like the repetition of images, all the really subtle aspects within this work really, really resonate with me. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. And I've not seen the work actually to scale. I'm looking at it on the screen. It's interesting that Evan actually mentions about the work being very much about galleries. So it's interesting to see it in this context. So yeah, going on to Izzy then. So I've been aware of Izzy for a while, being associated with Shy Bairns Collective, and the thing that I really like about Izzy's work is primarily the zines, actually being involved with Shy Bairns, but also Lonely Boy zines, and the zine that we have on this show, which is called So You've Realised You're Cis and You Don't Want to Be a Jerk, and it's just the greatest title ever. And again, the relatability of these iconic images as well, of these famous men, like looking at Elvis and James Dean. It's just such a simple movement, isn't it, within these photo montages or collages, but it's so effective and so striking. It's fantastic.
And reclaiming space for transvisibility as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
This sort of, canon of machismo. I love that.
Yeah, it's great. And also something we were talking about before, like the transmask studies with Izzy as well, in the way we've got this scrolling GIF at the top of the screen, which is really interesting in juxtaposition with the other artists, again going back to the different mediums that are within the show. So it's interesting looking at like Instagram and social media and how this work is becoming itself through that and changing within the communication to different audiences, very wide-ranging audiences.
So it was really important for us to have artists who were working across a range of mediums. So there's sculpture, printmaking, textiles, portrait miniatures, and digital work in there. So it's probably the broadest range, and photography. And each artist has their own sort of little interpretation bit and links here. And it was really important for us to have a range of identities in the artists representing transmasculinity and non-binary in the broadest possible range. There's you.
Yes, there's me. I think not making it all about me, but it was interesting because I've only just come out in the past couple of years to put my work in this context as well, and very much came from my research building upon this in relation to that identity and the lack of representation. So for me, the show is very important for that. I think it's a very positive show as well.
Yes, and we're seeing a lot more content coming out, particularly to do with transmasculinity and non-binary artists, but you still have to dig for it frequently. So I think it's about half the artists in the show identify as non-binary, so we're hoping that's going to come up in some of the discussion later. But otherwise we will just talk a little, in the interest of time, we'll just talk a little bit about the artists who are joining us. Because my background is in a museum, of course, in a lot of sort of 19th and early 20th century stuff. I loved the work of Buzz and Rhea in this regard, and thank you to you, Chess, for introducing me to the work of Rhea, who I had not heard of previously. So this is my absolute find of 2020. I just love this series. They're based on Catholic holy saints cards, but I think there's also a lot in them that links to 18th century prints, such as the Cries of London and the Cries of Paris, which are these sets of prints looking at street vendors and people on the margins, and they have sort of a bit of a similar style to that, and also some all different kinds of collectors cards which have biographical information usually on the back. In this case, Rhea's presented them as a book, and on their website there's the biographical information for these people who are forgotten out of history, but who have been brought back to life through this absolutely beautiful series of paintings. And Buzz similarly has sort of taken another look at a figure who is very well known. George Sand, the novelist, French novelist of the 19th century, but has sort of re-queered their story from this heteronormative mainstream reading, which explains away why they wore male clothing and why they chose to transgress gender in a variety of ways. So again, it's just a fabulous series. I really want to get these into the museum once I'm off furlough. So do look around all the other fabulous artists who are part of the show. It's an amazing show, and it's going to be online for a few more months until 1st of February 2021. So check it out, tell all of your friends.
Absolutely.
And watch this space for it becoming a larger, bigger physical show with more artists, hopefully in Manchester.
Absolutely.
Summer 2021.
Yeah. It'd be so interesting to see how the work is going to change when it's actually physically next to each other as well, like the perception of scale and how you actually experience the work in a physical space. So yeah, watch this space.
But now we would like to invite into the virtual room and 3 from across the pond. It's sort of lunchtime over with all of you over there. So we have Evan Schwartz, who's coming in from Chicago, I understand. Buzz Slutsky in Brooklyn, Ria Brodell in Boston, and Izzy Kroese in Manchester, much closer to home. So they're going to get added in momentarily after some more beautiful artwork.
Yeah.
And I will say at this moment, all of the Trans Vegas Festival stuff, if you missed it, that was on in June 2020. So we had Justin Vivian Bond and lots of other fantastic people, Campbell X and Nels, and a Black Trans Lives Matter march. There was loads of content. It's all still on the Trans Creative page.
It's Trans Up North as well.
Yeah.
Which I took part in. Very proud to be part of that. So there's 4. Sade's actually part of that as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's all still on. I'm not sure how long it's remaining on, but for a little while longer.
See in the future. So, yeah. Just waiting now.
Just waiting now for everybody to pop up. Everyone is in. Oh, is it because...
It's because we're in a different view. There you are.
But can I just then ask you all to... Hang on, as you are on my screen, just ask you to introduce yourselves, and from just going from how you are. So Izzy, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Izzy Kroese. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an artist and zine maker based in Manchester.
Thank you. And Buzz, you're next.
Hi, I'm Buzz Slutsky. My pronouns are also they, them, and I'm an artist and filmmaker, performer, educator based in Brooklyn.
Thank you. And Evan?
I'm Evan Schwartz, pronouns he, him. I'm actually from Chicago, but live in New Jersey. How dare you? And I'm an artist, photographer, based out of Jersey.
Thanks. And Ria?
Hi, I'm Ria Brodell, pronouns they, them. I am a painter and educator in Boston.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
Yeah. So we're going to ask you some questions now, and then we'll open it up to the chat. So my first question was for all of you, but let's start with Izzy. What do you think about this online exhibition, Found in Translation then? So what are your highlights?
It's great. It's really exciting to just be in an online exhibition at the moment, I think. I'm a disabled person, I'm chronically ill, so it's really important to me to think about accessibility in exhibitions, and it's really cool to be part of something that I can see from home. There's been loads of exhibitions about gender and masculinity that I've missed from not being able to travel places or go to galleries. So being able to be part of this accessible exhibition is something I've really enjoyed. I know a lot of the artists from Instagram, so it's really fun being part of this clique. But also getting to know people through it. It's really cool. Well, Buzz and Ria in this, I feel like we all have a similar practice in looking at history, and I think that's something that I've found really interesting. How history is united us all in this way, and the kind of comfort you can find in researching your history. So I've really enjoyed tapping into that. Just generally being able to access this and be in this space all together, non-physically, has been really brilliant, and I hope that can continue in other exhibitions after everything kicks off again.
That's great. So actually, let's move on to Buzz then, in response to that. What are your highlights of the online show then?
I mean, I'm just so thrilled to be included amongst both artists that I knew their work and also am being now introduced to people who I find very new and exciting. And I actually work at the Leslie Lohman Museum, where Ria is in the collection. So it was such a nice surprise. I'm an educator there, so we do engage with works in the collection, and it's fun.
Yeah. So Ria, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it's, I guess, similar to Izzy. I like the accessibility of the exhibition, and I really love the way it was put together online, the format. Like, as an educator, similar to Buzz, like, I'm working with students in the spring that were graduating and trying to put on an exhibition, and we were all like kind of frantically like, what do we do? What's this look like now? And so I love the format of the exhibition online, particularly the Q&A. Like, I really liked hearing everybody's thoughts and having the opportunity to share that way.
Yeah, I think because we put together those questions at the start, and then actually when we started to curate it, it just seemed so important to have that in there. And I think because I'm an educator as well, that's really interesting to hear. Yeah, I really like that. So yeah, that's a really important part for me as well. And I wonder how that's going to manifest when it's a physical show as well. Like, we need to keep that going. Sorry, I'm just like verbalizing notes here, so that's fine. Anyway, Evan, how about you? What are your highlights of the show?
Yeah, it's just been super simple as far as kind of what Buzz was saying. I am just really honored to be part of this compilation. I think it's exciting to see the spectrum of representation within our community, and you know, how we speak to our experiences. So I'm just excited to, just like the front page is like, like, just nice.
I'm really excited that some of you are going to do like a collaboration. That's like making me think that I want to ask you to collaborate, especially for what you just said, Izzy. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. So we'll pass over to Zorian now.
Well,
I'm down.
Okay.
I wanted to just sort of ask about your experiences as non-binary and trans artists in the wider art world, and what you think about sort of groupings of exhibitions of queer work, or the opposite is what if you're, you know, included in group shows that have no kind of queer perspective. Like, do you have any particular kind of experiences or challenges or triumphs or anything about, you know, such dealings with in the wider art world? And that can be to anyone. Do you want me to point it to?
I've noticed that Izzy has unmuted, so.
Yeah.
A lot of the time I work in a collective, as Chaz mentioned at the start. I work in a zine making collective called Shy Burns, and I find that really useful, partly as a chronically ill person, having people to help me with stuff, but also because everyone just uses collective they pronouns anyway, so I don't have to deal with that. It's really nice. But other than that, you know, it's kind of a weird one being non-binary with stuff. I found that people just don't really understand why I'm invested in the stuff I'm invested in. I heard an interview once that was about Transmasc Archive, which is a project I do about transmasculine history. Clearly a very trans thing, but the interviewer used she, her pronouns throughout the whole thing, and it was just like, who do you think you're talking to about this thing? I just didn't get it. And then in a crit at uni, I also had this strange experience where someone told me I was appropriating the visual language of queer men because I didn't conform to their ideas of masculinity. And I just had to be like, do you know, like, this is my language as well. You know, it's a really binary idea of queerness sometimes, even within what we see as the accepting art world. But I found that cis people can be really reductive of non-binary experiences and not really know how to deal with that and categorize those within like visual languages and things like that.
Yeah. But it's really great the way that your work assimilates all of those things and just turns it into something that kind of like chews it up, doesn't it? And like turns it into this great artwork. And so in a way, it's an interesting relationship, isn't it, between those two experiences of making the work and that. And yeah,
I'm really interested in it, so I'm glad that comes up. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Yes.
This is like my favorite conversation topic, so I'm so glad to be asked. I've been in, I want to first say that I'm completely grateful for any opportunity. But of course, if there's a cis person curating a show about trans people, then, you know, there's some suspicion there, right? And I've had experiences before where if I voiced any sort of, you know, concerns about an exhibition, a response I got from a cis curator was, well, no one else in the show said anything about it. And it's like, half of the people in the show are no longer with us, they're deceased, and so how could they possibly speak up for themselves? You know, if the people that are the executor of their estates are also cis people, then how would they, you know, have any criticism about it? So I just feel like, you know, there's no excuse for not you know, including a trans person on a curatorial committee if it's a show about trans people. Even if it's just a show about queerness in general, I think there should be trans representation in the, you know, administration of it. So I'm just so thrilled that y'all are doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
I also find though that like there is always, you know, people love to critique everything and like poke holes in everything. And so I think that going back to like your original question a little bit, I do think it's important for queer artists and queer artwork to have its own space, but also be like at the same time also be involved with like maybe like a non-queer theme, because it's kind of about with lack of a better word, like normalizing our experience as just like a human experience. And you know, so I think that something that I try to do is really focus on that connection between, like, I know that most of my viewers are going to be cis hetero people potentially, or people without the trans experience, just because that's the majority of our world. And so I try to make sure that I'm focusing less on my uniqueness in my story and more about like the commonality of experiences and memories between people, so that we can have that connection, you know, just to bridge that gap, because it's so much easier to see the differences. It's so much easier to see the gaps. So when, like for myself, like I've personally never felt like I was being spoken for with my work, within whether it was like a group show or like a solo show. Like there's always that feeling of being on display though, a little bit like, ooh, a trans person, like let's get this in there, because I know that like in the art world it's money. It's just about money. It's like I need attention, I need money. That being said, like I also would like attention and money, you know. So it's it has gotten me some opportunities, and I'll take it, you know, as long as I have at least most of the control over what the message is.
Because there was a few shows suddenly, it all just seemed to come very quickly. Like in London, there was Kiss My Genders at Hayward Gallery, and Genders at Science Gallery, and a couple of other ones that there were lots of trans interest exhibitions. But I didn't know who curated them, but I don't think the people who curated it I don't think they were trans. I can't remember though, so I don't want to say the wrong thing. But yeah, it's interesting how these things, like suddenly there's an explosion of interest. But I also heard a lot of people talking quite pessimistically about how they imagined, well, we'll deal with it now, and then nobody will be interested for years or whatever. And I think that's pessimistic. I don't agree with that. But does anybody have has that been the case in America? Have you had has there been like a surge of sort of trans interest exhibitions and art events in the last kind of 3-4 years kind of thing that has been?
I feel like it was, for me, it was around like 2014-ish. And I think, you know, so I had top surgery in 2013, and definitely, you know, when I went to MFA directly afterwards, I was definitely making work that was looking at kind of like formal ways of communicating about like my kind of like visceral body experience. And that work was very much like kind of like I think some of the people that were interested in curating trans work were like, great, this is perfect. This is about the trans body. And it really made me not want to make that work anymore. And it also just stopped being interesting to me, because I kind of, you know, it's like, okay, I expressed this idea, time to move on. And it was really refreshing to then be considered for shows that were about more of the content of the work, rather than just my identity and whether my work fit into their idea of the identity category, kind of like Evan was saying. Yeah.
Or just, how about Rhea, what do you think?
Yeah, I have a lot going through my brain. I'm trying to sort out. I think from personal experience, like for me, dealing with historical figures has been the hardest when it comes to talking about those historical figures, explaining where I'm coming from, because for me it comes down to respect and empathy, and not trying to like box them in, because, you know, like sort of what Buzz was saying, like, you know, when you're dealing with people who can no longer speak for themselves, like you have to be very careful. And so yeah, I think that's where I run into a lot of not necessarily problems, but very like exciting, intense like discussions, you know, around like our history, and emphasizing, for me, I emphasize always that it's a shared history in the queer community, because we don't know, you know, I don't know if that's kind of one thing that I deal with in the.
So just to make it all about us as well, do you think it makes a difference to, let's just take the question, that you've had two trans masculine curators framing your work? Has that made a difference or not?
Definitely, yeah. I felt like my answer was kind of leading into that next question too. Yeah, like shared experience, right?
Yeah, that's good. How about
And Zorian, I couldn't be more thrilled that you're interested in my George Sand project, because that project has really gotten dusty. No one's really heard about it for a while. So I love that y'all are kind of pairing together my more recent work with that project, because I do feel like there's some connection there. So I feel seen. Thank you.
No, if I can, because printed things, I have more ability to collect at the V&A, but I have some small sway, I think, with the paintings people. So I'm going to talk to them about the Butch Heroes as well.
So I will say, I do have, I created those works as the same like the same size as a zine, and I did print it as a zine. So I'm happy to send them to everyone here.
I'll be in touch.
Great.
I'm back in the museum in November, so I will make light inquiries all around.
Very good. And obviously we want that work to be part of the show as well, don't we?
Yeah.
The physical show. So actually, as a theme, that's interesting. Okay, that's noted.
Yeah, it's sitting in a box uncollated behind me. So something to do during quarantine.
That's good.
Anyway, not to make it about business.
Well, why not? Evan, what do you think about that? What do you think about us? Not
well, buckle up. I mean, initially I thought nothing, like I didn't think about it at all, but I was like, oh, great, good people. I mean, two heads are better than one. I think that because one of the most important things I'm finding as I continue living as a trans person is that we all have our own experiences, and we all have our own bias as well as what the trans experience is. So I think it just makes the collection that much richer. So we don't come to the table with our own bias of what trans expression is and what that means, and what the trans masculine experience is and what the non-binary experience is. Because there is such a spectrum. I keep using that word, but I have no other words. So well done.
But yeah, there's not, I mean, people often say that they don't know that many trans, they only know of me as a trans person working in a museum in the UK, and there must be more trans curators who actually have museum jobs that are not out. I don't know, but yeah, it's, you know, it seems quite minimal, and also like the especially transmasculine content and non-binary content, like there's more visibility starting to come through, of course, but it is much more hidden. Like you have to kind of dig for it, but I don't know.
Not now though, not with this amazing show. And then when it's a physical show, it's going to be even
made
better.
it so accessible.
Yeah. So I've got a final question then from us, which is, so how has lockdown changed the way you're working? Do you share your work in a different way now? Is it perhaps not just digital, but more print-based? I know you work with print anyway, most of you. But yeah, and then leading on to, what are you working on next? So Izzy, do you want to go first again?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned that I'm chronically ill at the start, so my life has been very similar since lockdown. I'm still primarily sofa based, except now my partner's always watching me on the sofa because they're working from home. But yeah, so my practice before was very print based. I make zines a lot, and that's been something that I've carried through lockdown, which has been brilliant. I found myself needing like kind of calming activities. The anxieties of pandemic have got me a lot, so I've been doing lots of repetitive things. And I've got really into Lord of the Rings fan art. But aside from that, I've been working with my collective a lot on a zine series that we started before the pandemic, which is a monthly kind of reflection per zine. And that's been a really nice grounding, regular thing for me, every month making a zine with them. And that's been lovely. So a lot of it's kind of carried through. I was really well prepared for lockdown. I feel like I'm a pro. So I've been able to pretty much keep doing what I normally do, except get more praise for being well adjusted. I think zines are a really good way of bridging the need to physically interact with work and not be able to go to places and have that. I think there's really something special about being able to hold something in your hands and take it in your own time, which works really well, I think, at the moment. And I've been really thankful that I have that base in my practice.
That's really good. Have you seen like an increase in the engagement with your zines throughout this time then? Is that kind of increased?
Yeah, people have really responded to them, particularly the monthly zine. People like having a marker of time. We've had loads of people get back and be like, this is how I figure out a month has passed at the moment because I get my new thing, which is lovely. But also at the start of lockdown, I'm sure everyone saw like the 1 million quarantine open calls that people were doing. So I think everyone's found a zine in some form or other. I don't mind if it's not mine. I'll forgive everyone.
But it should be.
It should be mine. Go on Lonely Boy Zines or Shy Band's Patreon.
Yes. And Lonely Boy Zines as well.
Yes. That's why you buy your sis. My zine that's in the show.
Are we asking the same question about how your practice has changed and on ongoing projects to Evan?
Yes.
Well, it's not really changed because I don't really have an ongoing practice. So it's just doing what I'm still doing. I would say that I'm not chronically making work. That's never really been stopping my practice after I left art school. And I sort of just wait for inspiration to strike. But I think what I have been working on now is self-care, and that's been my priority. Like just mentally and physically, I'm not very good at it, but I'm learning. And part of that self-care within like the artistic practice is being okay with my process being my process. Because at the beginning of quarantine and throughout all the violence and civil unrest going on in our country, I have felt like, am I supposed to be doing something like with art? Like, am I supposed, like, is this the time I'm supposed to be doing something? And I have found that No, not necessarily. If I don't feel like it, and if it's not there, then I don't have to do it. It's not my responsibility to make art when it's not true. So, but I did get an idea recently, and I'm very excited about it. Then I probably forgot what it was, and then I remembered again. So I'm back, and I'm excited to move forward with it. And I think that it's, I'm not going to get into specifics yet because it's not fleshed out or created yet, but it's definitely a product of the world we're in, just based on the emotional roller coaster that this has sent us through. But it's unrelated to our world at the moment.
Oh, Ria?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what everyone was saying. Like at the beginning of pandemic, I thought like, uh-oh, like should my work change? What should it look like now? Like I have, I felt like everyone was saying now we have more time to hunker down and do these big things, and that was not the case in reality. But I am still working on Butch Heroes. It's been a lot slower than my normal process. My normal process is like work on a painting and then do research and then work on the next painting. And I've been doing just a lot of kind of downtime little watercolors of plants and things like that, which has been maybe my self-care. And I find myself doing a lot more like panel discussions or visiting artist things on Zoom, because Zoom has like created just like a lot more accessibility for those things. And that's been great.
And Buzz?
So I now share my studio with my partner, Zoe Schlachter, who's watching the panel behind me. But so I think it's nice to have that kind of person to bounce off of in the studio and that encouragement. I mostly have been focusing on my sketchbook practice, which I feel really helps me work because it lowers the stakes. Like I feel like if I buy myself really nice paper, it's just gonna mostly sit there unless I really force myself. So filling up the sketchbook with like kind of stupid drawings that are silly or about clothes, or paintings of flowers or something, has been really nice. I do feel myself like slowly being able to come back to my kind of long-term, more serious project, which I'm not going to talk about, but stay tuned on Instagram. I do feel like, I think also with one of my part-time jobs kind of drying up, the Leslie Lohman education stuff, I feel like now's the time to launch these bigger projects that I've kind of been like dreaming up, but I might start. Well, so for the Leslie Lohman thing, when we went remote, we started making these videos to engage with works in the collection, and I realized that my two skills of making videos and teaching kind of are nice together. And so I'm thinking about starting a YouTube channel that's both like totally stupid and also smart.
That sounds good. That kind of leads into, we've had a question from Dawn, who's actually upstairs in my house. I will come clean. But she says, this has already been touched on a bit, but this being an online exhibition and many of the artists using Instagram, etc., how much does acknowledging that some people will only ever experience your artwork online or on a screen, does this affect how you approach its creation or development? Does anybody have any feelings about that? I've been to an art fair before lockdown and noticed that a lot of people's work was almost formatted to be viewed in an Instagram-y world rather than, I don't know. Do any of you have any feelings about that, strong feelings against that, for instance? Because there's also been a rise of the book and the paper zine, etc.
Yes. Yeah, I have, I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
I have like split in my practice where a lot of it's made specifically for online, such as Transmask Archive, Transmask Studies. And just to join in on the secret project that everyone's alluding to, I've got a secret project as well. It's announced tomorrow. Searching on Instagram, everyone, which is completely online, and it's really, you have to gear yourself towards how people are going to interact with that and think about that particular context. But on the other hand, a lot of my work is very, zine printed. It's going to go to people's homes rather than sit in galleries. So it's different, it's really different context, and I find that really interesting to play with. And there are definitely things you have to consider. I mean, I found it strange thinking about my zine that's in this show, being in this show as a digital thing of it, rather than in a gallery or in people's flats. And it's just kind of learning as you go with translating works like that, because as much as I say I prepare some works for this context, some works for others, you can't control when you're going to be in an online show instead of a physical one. But generally, purposefully in my practice, there is a definite different intention between the two strands of my work.
Cool.
I'm interested in what Evan thinks about this.
I find it devastating to think about. Yeah, I mean, honestly, most of my work is seen online until someone picks it up and shows it in person. But I create with size in mind, and I create for that experience as well. Like, not all my photos this is the first time I've actually printed something like enormous for a gallery space. Well, enormous by my standards is like 40 by 60. And there is a purpose for that. So there are details that could be missed if you just look at it online, or if you like flick past it, that like I spent a lot of time and energy crafting. So I hope this is not the reality, but if it is, we can adapt, because we adapted to the digital age in general. I did not ever see myself shooting digital, and that's almost exclusively what I do, just because it's easy and I need instant gratification as a millennial. And but I do appreciate film for certain purposes, and I mean, for always, but in my work, I use it for some certain purposes if I want to send a certain visual message. So I will go with the flow, but it makes me think. I'm very curious to see how that potential reality shapes my work as well, and how much attention I put to the content versus with the constraints at hand. So
what do you think, Ria?
I think for me, like, obviously, like Evan, like, I love for people to see the paintings in person, because they're really small and detail oriented, and so it's always, I love seeing work in person. That's, for me, my favorite way to see it. But I also really come back to the fact that for me, the whole project is about disseminating information and education. And so however you see it it's one of the reasons I made the book, or wanted that to happen. And it's kind of weird, because then the book is out, and the book is what people see first most of the time, and they don't know that they're paintings. And so that's been interesting for me. But it's however they see it, I'm happy that it gets seen.
And we should say that the book is available. There's a link through your website.
Yeah, it's MIT Press. You can get it at most bookstores.
Yeah, great.
We have had another question through. Did you have a point to add there, Buzz? Oh.
I can wait till the next question.
Thank you, Cass Bradbeer, for asking. As an aspiring queer non-binary curator, I'm very conscious of exhibitions reducing artists to one aspect of their identity. So I was wondering, in what ways can museum professionals present art such that we promote transness explicitly enough to effect positive change, yet avoid implying that we can be reduced to an oversimplified set of labels? do you have any reductionist horror stories or hopeful accounts of intersectional curatorial activism? Buzz, do you have, at the Leslie Lohman, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's one that I ask myself a lot, because I sort of started my art career in New York by co-curating a show called the Pop-Up Museum of Queer History, which the second one was, and the third one were at Leslie Lohman. That was before I started working there, obviously. But I think that, like, I've definitely found some cross sections between trans artists and their work. For example, people that are really interested in childhood, or like childhood objects, or the ways that childhood images are very gendered, and kind of like reappropriating that and transgressing that. And I think in trying to formulate a sort of like curatorial proposal, I find myself worrying a lot about the ways that cis people might misunderstand that to mean like trans people are predators, or like trans people love children. You know, I just feel like it's such a slippery slope to try to find cross sections, because I don't know, I don't want to generalize trans people, and I do think, like, you know, intersectionality is important. It's important to not homogenize a group. And also there are some interesting trends that start happening when you connect the dots of people's practices. I don't know if that resonates with anyone.
I think like interpretation is a really fine art as well. Like, and as you mentioned this, Ria, with talking, like the words that you use to talk about people in the past, for instance, like, you know, it's all very loaded, but there's a way to do it whereby it is not, as you know, it's you can just leave the door open for. There's a great book that's just come out called Female Husbands by Jen Mannion. I don't know if people have seen that, but that just it does it very well, I think, as a good example of how to, you know, how important language is in just keeping an open mind, I suppose, and that is leading to less heteronormative views of things, and that could only be a good thing.
Absolutely.
Did anybody else have any other?
I was just thinking about, I've seen it done well with like artists like Harry Dodge, for instance, like whose work is interdisciplinary between like sculpture and video and drawing and painting, but also intersectional, and like humor is involved, and like yeah, it's just like smart ways where like the identity of the artist isn't the only highlight.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, just reading messages.
Yeah. Yeah, I do miss physical gallery spaces very much, and we've been involved in the Queer Britain. They're wanting to build a museum of LGBTQ history and art in London, and so we've been involved in some discussion about that, and Leslie Lohman has been obviously mentioned as an example, and the Schulers Museum in Berlin, who kindly shared this event as well. So, you know, it's interesting that there is always still some pushback even within the community about sidelining queer histories into one space, but I think it's just good for visibility, it's good for people to have safe spaces, it's good for community to have places to go, and, you know, that aren't just bars and everything, like for there to be cultural spaces. I think that's a good thing. Oh, we've got another cue. Anonymous attendee, thank you. If you've got time, what's the divide between work you create with a trans commentary because you want or moved to do so, versus because you feel you need to do so, perhaps politically or otherwise? Kind of already touched on, but curious as to the personal divide. Yeah, if people feel sort of, yeah, in any way, I suppose, not pressurized, but like that it would always be a feature of your work, but it doesn't.
This, I don't know if this is exactly the question, but I once had a curator ask me to make a specific project for a show that wasn't about it was like a specific show about a formal idea, and they're like, they found a pun with trans identity, and they were like, could you make a work that's this project? And I'm like, no, there's no project there. It's just your one language pun. So, you know, but, you know, in terms of like broadly answering the question, I kind of feel like people can smell bullshit. And I really feel like my work is much stronger when it comes from a place where like I'm falling asleep laughing about an idea, like, and it really touches me, rather than being like, oh, this person wants me to do this thing. I think inauthenticity is something that can really infect a body of work, and you know, something that really resonates with you, I think is going to resonate with others better as well.
All about being honest. So while I do feel like I need to make this work because it's who I am, and sometimes I feel more of a drive to get something out there because of what's going on in our environment, however that may be, but I can't force that either. So like, I might feel that like anger or that resurgence or whatever, like I need to speak for this because it's who I am and blah, 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 it's my responsibility. I can do that in other ways. But when it comes to my art practice, I still go to the foundation of connection with others who may not have this experience, and like pulling the similarities. So for me personally, like if I just create out of anger, I'm gonna miss the bigger picture, you know, and I don't feel like I have to make, you know, trans-centered work. It just continues to happen. And it's, you know, it just feels right.
When I made the zine that's in this exhibition, so you realise you're cis and you don't want to be a jerk, I'd recently come out, and it was basically a subtweet to everyone. I just wanted to tell people how to be not jerks. And I think that was more of the like, I felt I needed to get this thing out, and doing it through my practice was a way of not seeming like a knob. And so that felt really, you know, I had to do the thing. But then transmasc studies started, not really as a work, but as a way of archiving my research, and then spiraled into this thing other people had interest in. And on the flip side of that, the work I'm showing with Elvis, being photoshopped with top surgeries, was just like some weird whim that I decided to do. It didn't feel like a compulsion, it just felt funny. So there's like a balance between, I think, feeling like you need to get your identity processed through your work and just feeling silly and inspired by this weird thing that happens to you. So I think, yeah, there's a divide in my work personally between that. I think I've not outgrown, it's the wrong word. You know, I don't feel so compelled to comment on everything ever as I did when I did that zine. It felt very like, here's how you be an ally, which it's more complicated than that really. And I'm much more comfortable doing the things that I do now, which are silly and think about what I'm interested in, which is pop culture and Frodo. So, you know, political alignments have moved a little bit for me, maybe.
And I suppose that
I think
we're coming out of time.
Yeah, that went very quickly, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah. That's a shame. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. That was really, really nice. And then, you know, like looking at the journey of organising the show and the discussions that we've had, and like I said when we met before, we'd just been emailing you for like months, really long, tedious emails for you to read. So it's really nice to see you all here, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you in person at some point as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much for putting this together. It's such a treat.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to Aidan and Alex for doing all the technical prowess and the housekeeping.
And thank you to Kate O'Donnell as well, obviously.
Yeah, and everyone at Transcreative. But yeah, do please go on the Transcreative website and check out the content from the other ones and watch this space, because there will be future events of this nature coming up. So if you enjoyed yourself, we'd love to see you there. Okay, so thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you again.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.